Record. Okay. Good evening. My name is Emily, and alongside Amiral Akil, we are students from the Bachelor of Applied Language Studies, English for Intercultural Communication Program, UITM Shah Alam. As part of our e-sketchbook assignment for the course EIC 404, Cultural Perspectives in Malaysia, we will be interviewing a young man who will represent one of Malaysia's many cultures. Before we begin our interview, I will explain the aim of the assessment. Now, the aim of the e-sketchbook is to internalize the values of a specific Malaysian community and also the values which they may share with other cultures of Malaysia. With that aim in mind, we will be delving into the history and how the values have been shaped from said history and whether it had evolved with the modernization of the world. Disclaimer, this interview is held for educational purposes only. Without further ado, we shall begin the interview. Hello, welcome, and thank you for agreeing to be part of this interview. Can you please briefly introduce yourself?
All right, so hi. So my name is Jonathan Aaron Thomas. I'm 21 years old, and my ethnicity is Kadazan.
Can you please explain which part of Malaysia does Kadazan mainly occupy?
Okay, so the Kadazan people mostly occupied in Sabah. Yeah.
Is Kadazan separated into smaller unique sub-ethnicities, or is it just one big ethnicity?
Okay, so for most part, people usually confuse the word Kadazan Dusun being one single race when it isn't. It's actually two separate races. And there, we don't call it sub-ethnicity. It's more like, oh, if you're Kadazan, from which part of the area are you from? For example, my mom being from Kadazan Papar, and then my dad being Kadazan Penampang.
I see. Are there any differences between the Kadazan Penampang and Kadazan Papar?
To be honest, in my opinion, there isn't much difference, except for the language-wise being slightly bit different. You know, the word choice might not be the same, but then if two people from Kadazan Penampang and Kadazan Papar were to communicate, they can mostly understand each other.
Ah, so you would say there is a difference in lingo?
I would say yes, but very tiny, very, very small.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. We shall move on to the historical questions. Can you tell us what you know about the history of the Kadazan community?
To be perfectly honest with you, most people, they know very little or just on the surface level of the Kadazan history as a whole. But prior to the interview, I've done a little bit of research from the internet and also asking my family. So from what I can gather from the internet is that my people actually came from Taiwan, like we migrated from Taiwan to Sabah. And then we occupied this place called Lunuk Ragang. Lunuk Ragang? Yes, Lunuk Ragang in Tambunan, which is a very small area in Sabah. Yeah.
I see. So is the history of the Kadazan community any different from the history of the Kadazan culture as a whole?
Can you elaborate on this question?
So the history of the Kadazan community, let's say, let's see. Hello?
Yes, okay. So to elaborate on the question, the Kadazan community, as in like maybe your specific community, the Kadazan, as opposed to the culture as a whole in all of Sabah, for example. Is there any difference to that, do you think? Like maybe your mother from this specific community, your father from this specific community. Do you think there's any subtle differences?
I would say it's mostly the same. It means largely the same. But then I would say that the distinctness is probably came from each family. Yes, from, for example, let's say intermarriage between someone from other races, then there would be slight changes. Like there would be slight difference to the Kadazan culture in general. Yeah.
I see. Sorry, there was an internet problem. Now, moving on, how important do you think is the history of the Kadazan culture?
Since we're talking about the history and also the culture of a race, then of course anyone answer would be it's incredibly important to preserve our history, because that is where we came from. We were born into it. So that by preserving this, that we can pass down to the future generation so that they do not forget where they came from.
See, in your opinion, are the youth of the Kadazan community aware of the Kadazan culture history generally?
I would say they are aware of it, but mostly on the surface level and not in depth. Like, what's the significance of this part of the culture? Why do they do this? Why do they do that? They probably wouldn't know the answer unless the person they grew up learning about our culture, like in depthly. Then I would say yes.
With that in mind, do you think the history of the Kadazan culture should be exposed more, not only within the community, but also to all of Malaysia?
I would say yes. It is incredibly so that other people from other part of Malaysia knows the history and the culture of the Kadazan people, because being a part of Malaysia, we should not stay ignorant, so that in future time when you meet people from, for example, from my culture, then you would know how to not offend the person. Yeah.
I see.
Thank you. I would like to cut in here. Sorry. So you said earlier that you, prior to this interview, you did some research on your own about the history of the Kadazan.
Yes.
Was this the only way that you got to know the history of the Kadazan? Was it taught in schools or within your own community, or was this the only way you found out about the history?
Okay, so that's a very good question, because the history of the Kadazan people in general, most of the time it's not written in text and whatnot. It's most of the time it's from orally, from your grandparents telling you this type of stories. But yes, it's mostly from word of mouth. It's not written whatsoever.
So is the history of the Kadazan culture still relevant today?
I would say it is relevant, but only some part of it, whereas the other part, I would say it, let's say, for example, we take the Undung Adau, festivities, for example.
Okay.
So Undung Adau is a beauty pageant competition which being held each year. I feel like that part of my culture is relevant and should stay relevant until future times. But then if you're talking about the superstitious belief of my people who used to believe it back then I would say it isn't. Yes.
I see. So with the culture, how do you think the history of the Kadazan community shaped the values?
The values. I would say that the Kadazan values in general is
So to give an example of something for that, like we Malays value our freedom from our history of fighting for our independence.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the Kadazan would have similar similar values like that, or maybe additional values shaped from their history?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that family values are incredibly important in my culture.
I see.
Especially during Kamatan, where we have to gather around and meet our with our family members, close friends and whatnot. But I guess not only family values. I would say education. The importance of education is also important, especially now, especially today,
Mm-hmm.
where education is highly important for you to get a job.
Mm-hmm.
Because back then, my people being farmers and whatnot. So back then, there wasn't a lot of opportunity back then for people to move up the ladder. So then, yeah.
Thank you. That's very insightful. So you would say that, firstly, for the first part of your answer, that the Kadazan have a very close-knit community, so they would value familial values more.
Yes.
And the second part for education. Thank you. Very insightful.
Thank you for the insights. We shall now move on to the cultural questions. Let's start off with the language you mentioned earlier during the introduction. So you mentioned that the Kadazan have their own system of language. So how often do you use the Kadazan language as opposed to other languages?
To be honest, personally, it's incredibly rare for me to use the Kadazan language itself, because I grown up speaking Malay, English, and also Mandarin. And since my parents didn't really taught me how to speak it, to speak the language itself, but then I grown up like hearing my parents and my extended family speaking it. So I can understand a little bit, but I am unable to speak, to communicate.
I see. So so from your point of view, it's really hard for you to, would you say it's hard for you to see other members of the community speaking the language, the Kadazan language?
Oh, as in you're referring to someone from other race speak my language?
From your own race.
From my own race.
Like if you met someone from your own race and tried to converse with them, you'd find it very difficult.
I would say yes. To be honest, I would rather use Malay or English to communicate with them rather than using my own language. Yeah.
So nowadays, do you think the Kadazan language is valued enough within the community?
That's a very good question, actually. I would say it depends on the person and their upbringing, because I know like some part of my some of my friends who are Kadazan, they are unable to speak my language because their parents didn't taught them. And then also some part of my my other friends who know how to speak Kadazan because their parents taught them. So it's a mix of both. It depends on the family and their upbringing.
I see. That's quite an eye-opening right there. Now let's move on to, let's talk about the gender roles within the community. So are there any assigned gender roles within the Kadazan community? And
Gender
is
roles.
it enforced widely?
I wouldn't say it's enforced, but back then, when I say back then, it's like really, really back then. Men are usually they sort of are expected to be warriors. They are expected to protect their family and whatnot from dangers and from enemies, whereas the women, they are expected to work on the field, I would say.
I see. With that in mind, would you say the community, the Kadazan community, is a patriarchal community or a matriarchal community?
Usually, I would say it's patriarchal, because the man is expected to lead the family. You know, he is the head of the house. But then in my family in general, I guess it's a mix of both. You know, with my dad being the head of the house, but then since there are more females in the household, so then it's sort of like a majority against the minority, I would say. So in my opinion, it's a mix of both, at least in my case.
I see. Let's go back to the common values we discussed earlier. Would you care to, what are the common values are there common values that can be found within the community other than the familial bonds and the education?
Taking just for the Undung Adao example, we can say that, I guess, physical appearance, but then I would say the physical appearance is also a priority, I guess you can say. But then again, it's also about the quality of a person. I guess we are expected to be selfless, I guess, in a way. That we have to help out people who are within our community. We are expected to help them a lending hand if they are in trouble, for example.
Going back to the keamatan you mentioned prior, do you think there are any values that can be shaped from the keamatan?
Then I would say it's that values that we have to be grateful for what we have, you know, because keamatan originally, what it means is the harvest festival, where, you know, each year we harvest the rice from the paddy field, and then taking from that we have to be grateful for what we have.
So you would say like there's a value for food and not to be, let's say, wasteful of the food that you have.
Yes, I would say yes.
Okay. Now let's talk about the customs.
Right.
Do you think there are any customs, your community customs, that you still practice today? And if so, what are the customs?
Customs. Are you referring to my family alone, or just like the Kadazan people in general?
We can
if it's easy on you,
both,
then your family alone. But if you can, Kadazan in general. So.
It's hard to say because my family, there's a mix of both Kadazan and also Chinese influences. So then it's very hard for me to say a specific concrete answer to that question.
I see. Well, to add on to that then, is it common for Kadazan to have, you know, the values of Chinese members as well, or is that specific to your family?
I would say it's pretty common since let's say a Kadazan person marries a Chinese, then there's a specific word for that intermarriage, which is what we call a Sino Kadazan.
Sino Kadazan.
Yes, there's a specific word for it, and then from that marriage, then both culture there's like intertwined together. So that's why it's very common for you to see Kadazan people celebrate Chinese New Year. So then in total, we would say we have the Chinese New Year, Keamatan, and also Christmas. And for example, if they're Muslim, then they have, you know, Eid.
Yeah. I see, that's very insightful. Well, in that case, then, yeah, you can talk about the values specifically for your family, your Sino Kadazan, as you said.
Then I would say that you know how like Chinese people, they have those belief with feng shui and whatnot. Then we do have that. We do practice those type of things, but then not as a whole, I would say, not entirely.
I see. So you only took a little bit part, a small part of it.
Yes, I would say small part of it, not the whole thing.
We've talked about the customs, let's say, and would you be willing to talk about the taboos or any other superstitious beliefs within the Kadazan community?
Superstitious belief. So then, taboos. We do have this thing we call sogit, which you can just basically say it's law or it's a rule that you have to follow. And but then again, sogit is not something that we believe anymore. I would say some part of it, yes, but then also some part of it, it's not relevant anymore. For example, for example, okay, okay. There's this story that I heard when I was little. I'm just going to tell a very brief version from what I hear. Basically, in my mom kampong, there used to be this headhunter, I would say, headhunter, and the guy would walk around the kampong carrying this incredibly long machete, and he would walk around to find people to kill, to cut their head off. Yes, and the reason why he did that is for him to build a bridge and then to bath the bridge in blood so that the bridge will hold. So the slogan is that he have to bathe the bridge in blood, or else the bridge will not hold. It will actually crumble. But then it is, I would say, a superstitious belief.
I see. Thank you. That's so. That's an old story from your mom's village, yeah? Not
Yes.
Not recent.
No, it's not recent. It's incredibly old. Yeah.
I see.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was quite shocking. Well, let's talk more about the common values. Do you think that there are common values that you may share with other cultures of Malaysia?
Other culture. Then, like I said before this, family bond. Also, I guess education, since most people believe that education is incredibly important. Family bond, for example, Chinese New Year, Hari Raya, and whatnot. Those are incredibly important as well. But then I would probably say not the same for the that you have to take care of your parents' wives. I would say that's mostly unique to my culture. I mean, I'm not sure, but yeah.
So in terms of familial bond, in the Malaysian culture, specifically in the Malays, it's expected for the children to respect the elders, like no matter if they're how many years older, or like whether you know that person or not. Does that apply to the Kadazan community as well?
I would say it is, but then that part of the I would say value that we have to respect our elder, I would say it's more like an Asian type of culture. It's like Asian in general, not being only unique to my culture alone.
I see. Thank you. But you would say, you all have in common with Asian.
Yeah,
Asian
it is something common. Yes, I agree.
I believe Hold on, I'm sorry. I have a notification from Zoom. Okay, I believe we have enough information.
Material
Okay.
to go on.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we end the interview, do you have any final words that you wish to share with the viewers or to whoever is listening?
So hi, it might be a lecturer. So hi, madam. I assume it's a madam. So the things that I told just now are mostly from what I heard, from what I read on the internet. So do not take my answer as a concrete that is the absolute answer at all. Disclaimer. So yeah, just I hope you enjoy what I just told just now. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you so
again.
much for joining us, John.
Thank you for agreeing to be part of this interview. With that
It's been a
being
pleasure.
said, absolutely, we shall end our interview. I'm sure we have learned quite a number of things, surprising, if not very insightful in regards to the Kadazan community. We'll do our best to share the values mentioned in the creation of our e-sketchbook. We wish you a very good night and thanks once again.
Question about history, so then I have to know my own history. That's the only reason why I Googled it. Because if not, then to be honest, I wouldn't know at all. And then I can safely say for sure, most people don't know about it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah,
So
even I did. Yeah, if you didn't know, apa lagi, right? Okay, this is definitely, yeah. This is, I guess, why one of the things we wanted to touch on for our e-sketchbook here. Like, a lot of people don't know. It's a shame.
Yeah, I agree. Most people don't know.
Respect for elders.
What was the other one? Huh? The other one we talked about was education and physical appearance.
Yeah, physical appearance.
There's the beauty standards. So familial bond.
That still applies even today.
Food, education, respect for elders.
But then the beauty pageant, I can probably explain more, since my sister told me the significance of it. But then I guess I was just too nervous to tell the story.
Too blank, but we honestly we should have asked more about that as well. But
I mean, you can talk about it right now. We're not gonna lie, I'm recording.
Oh, okay, so the significance of the Undung Adau, the beauty pageant, it actually is both male and also female. But then I only know the female part of the story, but then only little bits of it. But then I'll try as best as possible to tell the story. So the story goes that once upon a time, there's this Bobo Hizan. Bobo Hizan basically means priestess, but then I guess in Malay you can say it's Bomo, I would say. And then this priestess, their job is to cure people from disease, illness, for even black magic, for example. And I guess you can say predict the future. Okay, so on this one particular year, the Bobo Hizan, they predicted that on that year, famine would land across the land. They would ravish across the land. And then it's actually true. A lot of people died from that famine. So there's this one family, the parents and then their daughter. And the daughter, she voluntarily to sacrifice herself so that the famine will be no more, basically. And then it actually did. The famine was lifted up. And from what I can understand, her teeth became corn, jagung. And then also some each part of her body have a significance. But then I do not know all of it. So that's my bad, I guess. But I only know that her teeth became corn.
I see, that's very interesting.
So you mentioned Bobo Hizan tadi. Have you ada experience any meeting dengan Bobo Hizan with the Bomo?
I can safely say for sure, nobody that I know have ever met a Boboisan. It's practically non-existent anymore. Legit.
see.
I don't think there even exists one.
Maybe in cultural punya like memang cultural
Maybe,
punya museum.
yes.
How's
no,
your sister?
Probably not. I haven't asked my sister. I've not asked if she ever met one. But most people have not even met one. Since even the word Boboisan itself is incredibly rare for you to hear today.
Nice.
You know.
In fact, yeah, the first time I've ever heard it was from you, so that's another point of it. But okay, is there any? You mentioned that they are priestesses, right?
Yes.
So is there a male equivalent to that, or is it only just priestesses?
To my knowledge, it's only female. To my knowledge, I'm not sure if there's a male one, but Boboisan are predominantly female.
Okay, thank you. So it reaffirms your earlier say that the Kadazan like a mix, even though the males are mostly warriors and the females.
Yes, it's a mix.
Like obviously, if they're priestesses, the females are still very much respected.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's extra material. I'm so glad I recorded it.
Yes, absolutely. Nice one.
Okay. Okay. Before kita end this, let's see. Let's go through. Hold on. I'll end this recording kejap.
Yeah, China. Whenever we meet that person from we know that person is Kadazan, for example. There's always I guess feeling of some that's my people. That's my homie.
Yeah.
There's always that feeling. I don't know how to describe it, but yeah, that's my brother.
It's easy to identify one of your of your own.
It's very proud to. You're proud to meet them. Like unlike we Malays, we just meet another Malay. Yeah. So.
Oh, Melayu.
Melayu. Okay. I see. That's great.
Akhil,
Not sure what kind of value.
Yeah, lagi dua.
Well, we can talk about the. Oh, okay, John. Why don't you elaborate a bit more on the soge, because you said that the story of your grandmother's village with the blood-covered bridge and all that. But what do you think the value of that is from that soge? Yeah, why is that a thing?
Sogit, since I did mention Sogit being some type of law, right? I guess you can from I guess if you were to look at it from another perspective, then that is to keep I guess chaos from breaking out, since Sogit does mean law. So I guess it is to keep the peace, for people not to fight against each other.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So
yeah,
peace
law and order,
and harmony, yeah, absolutely.
But then again, Sogit, I'm not sure, since Sogit also applies to marriage as well. But then since I have very little knowledge about that, I can't say for sure. But then it does have. But then I can't say for sure. I do not know.
Okay, so
but you would say that it wouldn't really apply to you. You've lived your whole life not knowing too much about them, right?
Yes.
Right.
It's basically non-existent anymore.
Non-existent anymore, yeah.
Yes.
Obvious, I would hope so, blood bridge and all that.
Is it safe to say, like, because of the whole intermarriage thing with other races, it evolves, it adapts with the other cultures as well?
I guess that would depend. Juga. Because if you intermarriage, then I would say most of the cultural perspective doesn't change if the marriage happened between non-Muslim, if they're Christian. But then if it happens between a Christian and a Muslim, obviously they have to convert, right? So then the culture might shift, it might change. But then I can't say for sure. Since I have very little knowledge about that.
Yeah.
There is some level of cultural flexibility, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes.
They don't mind one way or another. obviously like Sino Kadazan. He said that's very interesting.
Yes.
I did not know about that. That's very insightful. Okay, so with that, I think we have 5: familial bonds, education, community-oriented, being selfless and trying to work for your community, I guess, Like, obviously, they were all, the Kadazan used to be, tightly knit community, small people. Another one is law and order with the Soge, very scary. And another one is cultural harmony, I think. I think that's a good one because, like you said, the Sino Kadazan and the intermarriage between different parts of the Kadazan.
Yes.
Yang shared Malaysian values.
I think those were the shared Malaysian values. Like, these are the values that we've gotten, and we can, like, how do you say, relate it back to our own values.
Yeah,
So, because okay, this is another question that you didn't actually ask, MZ. What kind of values? This is the number 5. Question number 5. What are the values that you think only your community have?
Number 5.
Okay, well, it's not number 5 anymore. I don't know. We already deleted the religious one. Is the one above common values with other nations? What are some of the values you think only the people of your community have? But I think that's a tough question. I think
yes, that's a very tough question.
Very tough question because a lot of things can be shared. Like so far, all of the values that you've given can definitely be a value that can be shared between many cultures. So it's fine if we don't ask.
I'm not sure if there's like distinct one. Yeah, I don't think there is any like distinct this or only my people have this. I don't think we have that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I can't think of one either for Malays, for example. Yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. As for shared culture, yeah, like I said, like the values that we have right now, we have like 5, definitely more actually, because I haven't actually gotten to note them all down for certain.
I mean, we did talk about the value of history and then the value of language. I think we can.
Yeah. This is just from culture.
Correct. Yeah. We can try to correct. Analyzing time.
Lots of analyzing. John, I forgot. Is John? Are you in our course as well, or no?
I'm applying for degree. I'm applying for UPU.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. But then I am applying for LG 240. So,
Yeah.
I
hope you get that one.
But then if you have any question, you can ask me. I could probably muster up something when I think back of my history. Come on. But then, yeah, you can ask me anytime.
Absolutely.